Martha looked indignant. "Well, it would do thee good to try it, I can see thee plain enough," she said outspokenly. "I've no patience with folk who just sit and stares at good bread and meat. My word, don't I wish Dickon and Phil and Jane and the rest of 'em had what's here on their pinafores." "Why don't you take it to them?" suggested Mary. "It's not mine," answered Martha stoutly, "and this isn't my day out. I get my day out once a month, same as the rest. Then I go home and clean up for Mother and give her a day's rest." Mary drank some tea and ate a little toast and some marmalade. You wrap up warm and run out and play, you," said Martha. "It'll do you good and give you some stomach for your meat." Mary went to the window. There were gardens and paths and big trees, but everything looked dull and wintry. "Out? Why should I go out on a day like this?" "Well, if they doesn't go out, then they'll have to stay in, and what's they got to do?" Mary glanced at her. There was nothing to do. When Mrs. Medlock had prepared the nursery, she had thought nothing of amusement. Perhaps it would be better to go and see what the gardens were like. "Who will go with me?" she inquired. Martha stared. "You'll go by yourself," she answered. "You'll have to learn and play like the other children does when they haven't got sisters and brothers. Our Dickon goes off in the moor by himself and plays for hours. That's how he made friends with the pony. He's sorry. He's got the sheep on the moor and knows him, and a bird that comes out and eats out of his hand. However little there is to eat. And he always saves a bit of his bread to coax his pets." It was really this mention of Dickon which made Mary decide to go out, though she was not aware of it. There would be birds outside, though. There would not be ponies or sheep. They would be different from the birds in India, and it might amuse her to look at them. Martha found her coat and hat for her, and a pair of stout little boots, and she showed her way downstairs. "If thou goes round, then thou'll come to the gardens," she said, pointing to the gate in a wall of shrubbery. "There's lots of flowers in summertime, but there's nothing bloomin' now." She seemed to hesitate a second before she added, "One of the gardens is locked up. No one has been in it for 10 years. "Why?" asked Mary in spite of herself. Here was another locked door added to the hundreds in the strange house. Mr. Craven had it shut when his wife died so suddenly. He won't let no one go inside. It was her garden. He's locked the door and dug a hole and buried the key. There's Mrs. Medlock bell ringing. I must run." After she was gone, Mary turned down the walk which led to the door in the shrubbery. She could not help thinking about what the garden which no one had been into for 10 years. She wondered what it would look like and whether there were any flowers still alive in it. When she passed through the shrubbery gate, she found herself in the great gardens, with wide lawns and winding walks with clipped borders. There were trees and flower beds and evergreens clipped into strange shapes, and a large pool with an old gray fountain in its midst. But the flower beds were bare and wintry, and the fountain was not playing. This was not the garden which was shut up. How could a garden be shut up? You could always walk into a garden. She was just thinking of this when she saw that at the end of the path she was following, there seemed to be a long wall with ivy growing over it. She was not familiar enough with England to know that she was coming upon the kitchen gardens, where the vegetables and fruit were growing. She went toward the wall and found that there was a green door in the ivy that stood open. This was not the closed garden, evidently, and she could go into it. She went through the door and found it was a garden with walls all around it, and that it was only one of several walled gardens which seemed to open into another. She saw another open green door, revealing bushes and pathways between beds containing winter vegetables. Fruit trees were trained flat against the wall, and over some of the beds there were glass frames. The place was bare and ugly enough, Mary thought, as she stood and stared about her. It might be nicer in the summer when things were green, but there was nothing pretty about it now. Presently, an old man with a spade over his shoulder walked through the door leading from the second garden. He looked startled when he saw Mary, and he touched his cap. He had a surly old face and did not seem at all pleased to see her. But then she was displeased with his garden and wore her quite contrary expression, and certainly did not seem pleased at all to see him. "What is this place?" she asked. "One of the kitchen gardens," he answered. "What is that?" said Mary, pointing through the other green door. Another of 'em, shortly. There's another on the other side of the wall, and there's the orchard on the other side of that. Can I go in them? Asked Mary. If thou likes, but there's naught to see. Mary made no response. She went down the path through the second green door. She found more walls and winter vegetables and glass frames. But in the second wall there was another green door, and it was not open. Perhaps it led into the garden which no one had seen for 10 years. And she was not at all a timid child, and always did what she wanted to do. Mary went to the green door and turned the handle. She hoped the door would not open, because she wanted to be sure she had found the mysterious garden. But it did open quite easily, and she walked through it and found herself in an orchard. There were walls all around it also, and trees trained against them. And there were bare fruit trees growing in the winter-browned grass. But there was no green door to be seen anywhere. Mary looked for it, and yet when she had entered the upper end of the garden, she had noticed that the wall did not seem to end with the orchard, but to extend beyond it, as if it enclosed a place at the other side. She could see the tops of the trees above the wall, and when she stood still, she saw a bird with a bright red breast sitting on the topmost branch of one of them. And suddenly he burst into his winter song, almost as if he had caught sight of her and was calling to her. She stopped and listened to him, and somehow his cheerful, friendly little whistle gave her a pleased feeling. Even a disagreeable little girl may be lonely. And the big closed house and big bare moor and big bare gardens had made this one feel as if there were no one left in the world but herself. If she had been an affectionate child, who had been used to being loved, he would have broken her heart. But even though she was a Mistress Mary quite contrary, she was desolate, and the bright-breasted little bird brought a look to her sour little face which was almost a smile. She listened to him until he flew away. He was not like an Indian bird, and she liked him and wondered if she should ever see him again. Perhaps he lived in the mysterious garden and knew all about it. Perhaps it was because she had nothing whatever to do that she thought so much of the deserted garden. She was curious about it and wanted to see what it was like. Why had Mr. Archibald Craven buried the key? If he had liked his wife so much, why did he hate her garden? She wondered if she should ever see him. But she knew that if she did, she should not like him. And he knew that if she did, and he would not like her. And that she should only stand and stare at him and say nothing, though she should be wanting dreadfully to ask him why he had done such a queer thing. People never like me, and I never like people, she thought. And I can never talk as the Crawford children could. They were always talking and laughing and making noises. She thought of the robin, and of the way he seemed to sing his song at her, and she remembered the treetop he perched on. She stopped rather suddenly on the path. I believe that tree was in the secret garden. I feel sure it was, she said. There was a wall round the place, and there was no door.